Well, greetings from Cooperstown, New York, side of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a very special edition of Virtual Voices of the Game. Joining me, Bruce Markison. It's our pleasure to welcome to the Hall of Fame airwaves the great Dusty Baker. This Saturday, April 8th, is Hank Aaron Day. It'll mark the 49th anniversary of Aaron's historic home run, number 715, to eclipse the mark of the Babe, a record once considered unbreakable. With us to talk about Hank Aaron is the Hammer's longtime teammate, also the world championship manager of the Astros, Dusty Baker. Dusty, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing fine, man. It's just great seeing some of these photos with Hank and myself, but mostly, with Hank.
Dusty, tell us about the first time that you met Hank Aaron. I'm guessing this would have been maybe spring training, late 1960s. What do you remember about the first meeting?
Well, the first meeting with Hank Aaron was 1967 in August, before I had even signed. And the Braves sent for my mother and myself because I had about 2 weeks to go before I had to enter school at the University of Santa Clara to play basketball. And they flew my mom and I down to LA. And I tried out in Dodger Stadium. I had already been drafted, but I worked out with the team. I took the bus. Paul Richards got my mom and I a room, and I took the bus out and sat next to Hank Aaron and Philippe Alou and Joe Torre and all these guys. I worked out in Dodger Stadium, and man, as a kid, I was always a Dodger fan, and I had seen Hank, Joe Adcock, and Eddie Matthews hit a number of home runs and a doubleheader earlier in my Little League days at the Coliseum. And so Hank told my mom, I didn't know if I was going to sign. I didn't know what to do. And he told my mom that if I had enough confidence in myself that I would be in the big leagues by the time my class would have graduated from University of Santa Clara, to go ahead and sign. If not, and then go play basketball. But he did promise my mother that if I signed, he would take care of me as if I was his son, and made me go to church and school. And he did just all of those things. So that was my first actual meeting with Hank Aaron.
Wow. After you joined the Braves, was it at all intimidating at first being around such a legendary player? You mentioned that, he made you feel welcome, but was there any level of intimidation at the beginning?
No, not at all. Because see, not only did I have Hank Aaron, but I had Ralph Garr, who was always with us. And, I think you need to possibly interview Ralph Garr too, because it was Ralph, Hank, and myself always with Hank. And we were September call-ups that next year in 1968. Then I was a call-up at 69. I went to the military, didn't have spring training. And, I didn't have spring training for a couple of years. And I had 1 week of spring training in 68 because I was in school, because Vietnam was hot. You had to carry 15 units per semester and pass them all, no incompletes, no Fs, no nothing, which my mother wouldn't have gone for anyway. But I had 1 week of spring training. That was when Hank Aaron, let me see, Martin Luther King got assassinated. I was in spring training, I think, that year. And so my first full spring training was in 1970. And so then I got called up in 69 in June, and I wanted to go home. I could have gotten called up with Ralph again that September of 69, but I wanted to go home because I'd been in the military, played ball, and they wanted me to come back to Atlanta. And I said, no, I was homesick. And then I got called up again in 70, and then I made the team in 71, and then sent back down. Then I was a September call up again, I think in 71, and I finally made the team in 72. So, I felt like I always belonged, and especially the fact that I had Ralph Garr with me. And, the guys on the team made us feel good. I have a Polaroid with I remember Hank wasn't in this Polaroid, but Hank, Bob Tillman, Cleet Boyer, and Bob Euchre took us to the Playboy Club in Atlanta and bought us our first suit. And I got that photo at the house. But those guys, man, they always, made Ralph and I feel like we belonged on the team and in the big leagues.
Well, I got to commend you for surviving that trip with Euchre and Boyer. That's an accomplishment in and of itself. So I'm getting the impression, Dusty, that you and Hank became friends pretty much immediately.
Yeah, and I was closer in age to Hank's kids than I was him. And they'd be entertainers over to Hank's house when he was married to Barbara, his first wife, who was our farm director's sister, Bill Lewis's sister. And I'd go over there, Ralph and I, to Hank's house to eat all the time. And I'd play jacks with Dorinda and jump rope with Gail, and then I'd play basketball with Larry and Hanky. So like I said, I wasn't old enough to drink, and Hank wouldn't let me drink, and Ralph didn't drink at all. So I was, like I said, I was closer in age to his kids, and I'm still close, to his kids. And so, Hank was, he was hard on us. I mean, there were times when he acted like he was my dad, or but there were times where he acted like he was my uncle or my brother too at the same time. And he would never really tell us what to do, but he would insinuate if you were doing wrong, he'd let you know you were doing wrong, or sometimes he'd call me boy or hard headed, and I knew that he meant business by what he said. And he taught us a lot. He taught, like I said, Ralph and I a lot about life period, especially, and he taught us a lot about baseball. But some of the things he would tell me, he knew I wouldn't understand, and a lot of things I use what he taught me then. And he'll say, "Hey man, do you understand?" I'll say, "Oh yeah, I understand. I don't understand anything." And then he said, "Well, just do me a favor, whether you understand or not, just retain it." And he says, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, it might come to you. And it's happened to me over and over and over again to retain something that he told me.
When Hank passed away January of 2021, you issued a beautiful statement. I want to read it here. Hank Aaron was the most important influence on my life next to my dad. He was the best person that I ever knew and the truest, most honest person I ever knew. He taught me how to be a man and how to be a proud African American. He taught me how important it was to give back to the community, and he inspired me to become an entrepreneur. Hank impacted my life, my family, and my world, both on and off the field. He was a great man. That was certainly beautifully said by you. What are the kinds of things that he might have told you once you had established yourself with the Braves? Did he talk about, this is how we carry ourselves when we go on the road, when we're in front of fans, when we're talking to fans? Mm-hmm. Did he tell you this is how we need to behave, how to represent ourselves? Was that part of the learning?
That was a big part of it. But when I signed with the Braves, I prayed that the Braves did not draft me, because I didn't want to go to the South. And at 67, man, I mean, that was a tremendous amount of unrest in the country. I remember seeing, from California, seeing Lester Maddox and seeing, George Wallace, freedom marches, and then a lot of the people that I had seen on TV, I ended up meeting through Hank, because he was very involved in the NAACP, much like my parents were. And I'd go over his house, and there'd be Maynard Jackson, and there'd be Andrew Young, and there'd be Ted Abernathy, and then we go to Chicago, and then we'd go to Jesse Jackson's house, and we'd talk about, a lot of the civil rights issues that my parents talked about, or a lot of things that I saw, on TV. And, taught me how to, when to be cool and when to stand up and be a man, and especially in the South, because that could be detrimental to your health. especially back in those days. And he taught us how to train. He was the first guy that was into nutrition. He taught us, how to eat right. Like when to let your hair down, so to speak. When you'd go out and have some drinks, you'd have either a night game the next day after a day game, or either it would be a day off prior to a day off. I mean, he was very disciplined. I mean, he played racquetball, handball. Like I remember he sometime would like ball up he always had hand grips, keep your hands strong. He would take the Sunday paper, fold it up, and then crumple it up from the center until a tight ball, one page at a time on each hand. And I could do about 3 or 4 pages, and Hank would do the whole thing. And he taught us a lot, like I said, about what was coming to the plate. He told me how to hit Tom Seaver. He said, make him get the ball down. Or Steve Carlton, he said, man, if you see it spinning from the hips down, you take it because it's going to be a ball. He had a theory and a philosophy, about everything that he did. And, he could tell by the way you held your bat if you're going to be a right field hitter or a pull hitter, or a high ball hitter or a low ball hitter. There wasn't any scouting reports basically, and you had to retain everything that you learned on the field, and you had to, or else you didn't survive. He knew every pitcher. He had it memorized. Slider away, fastball in. I mean, what they try to do to you, or what the pitching coaches of those particular teams' philosophy was. And so, he was an astute businessman, and I mean, even he was taking care of me this spring, because I was driving his, Billy let me drive his BMW in spring training. That it was a 2016, had 13,000 miles on it. And Billy says, hey, Dusty, I want you to drive this in spring training. I'm like, hey, man, he's taking care of me even to this day. But one of the saddest things in my life, the reason I made this statement, was the morning of his passing, that my wife came in and woke me up and told me that Hank Aaron, had passed. And it's right before spring training, right after I'd taken this job. And boy, that was tough. And even in spring training, even last year and the year before, we were playing the Braves. I was praying and I was asking Hank, man, who you rooting for, us or the Braves? And it was the year of Hank Aaron. And so I found out my answer. He was rooting for the for the Braves, but then he was rooting for us last year when we were fighting for the pennant. So, everything in its time.
Let's talk about April 8th, 1974. The anniversary is coming up. Home run number 715. Bottom of the 4th inning, Hank faces a pretty good pitcher, Al Downing, a left-hander for the Dodgers. When he makes contact against Al Downing, you're watching from the on-deck circle. Did you think it was going right away?
Oh, yeah. Well, he told me he was going to get it over with. He said, I'm getting it over with right now. And I said, okay, Hank, because he would tell me, guy's going to throw me inside fastball, then going to throw me a slider on the outside. I'm going to hit it over the right center field fence. And he wasn't predicting like Muhammad Ali when he was going to knock somebody out in the round. He was really schooling me about how to hit and schooling me on how to be a thinking man's hitter. And he told me, he goes, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. I'm going to hit it over the left field fence. I'm going to get it over with right now. And that's what he did. And, I gave him 5 from the on-deck circle, but I didn't run up to the plate and crowd around him, because to me that was, I didn't want to be in the photos, because that was Hank's moment.
Yeah.
And that's why when I saw that first photo of Hank coming across and giving me 5 when he came across, like I said, I had never seen that picture I've seen pictures of Hank and I on deck, but I'll tell you that was a wonderful night. I really didn't have any idea or clue on the magnitude of that night, until I got further away from it. The further I get away from it, the more magnificent a night that was. And I mean, it wasn't only for baseball, but it was for America. I mean, that in some ways, I mean, there were people rooting against him because he was black, and in some ways, it united people of all races, all over the world. And Hank, I mean, he's known all over the world.
Yeah. There was a delay of probably 10, 12 minutes. There was a ceremony on the field. Did you sense that he felt awkward about that? Because he always struck me as a very modest, very humble guy.
Well, that's how he taught us to be. I mean, he said externally that's how he's supposed to be, but internally he was extremely confident. I'm talking extremely confident. But I learned from him, and then later on I learned from like Sandy Koufax was the same way. Externally, and I just saw Joe Namath down in Florida. He's the same way. I mean, and that's what true greatness is about. And I remember asking Hank, I said, man, who was the toughest pitcher for you to face? And because I was full of questions, and then he'd tell me, man, he said, boy, you ask a whole bunch of questions. You ask too many questions. And then I stopped asking questions, and then he'd like, hey man, you don't have a question? And so I think he kind of liked me asking these questions because I was trying to learn. But I asked Hank who was the toughest pitcher for him to face, and he told me Sandy Koufax. And then when I got to the Dodgers, I was sitting in the bullpen and Vero Beach in spring training with Sandy, and I asked him who was the toughest player for him to face. He told me Bad Henry, and I found that amazing that both of them said that each one of them was the toughest to face.
Dusty, here's the lineup card from that day. We have it in the collection here at the Hall of Fame. I think it's one of the great artifacts that we have. You can see your name right after Hank, who's in the cleanup spot. It's signed by Hall of Famer Eddie Matthews, who of course was the manager. In both 73 and early 74, he received a tremendous amount of hate mail, many death threats. Were you aware of this? Did he talk about that at all?
Well, he didn't talk about it much, but we knew it was there because he would get in his locker and you see his eyes get like steel. And you could tell. Then he'd throw it on the floor and he'd go in the training room. Ralph and I would read it. And then he had a bodyguard, Calvin Wardlow, he'd get the phone calls and we'd know about it. He had two rooms, the room he slept in and a fictitious room. And, we knew about it, but he didn't really, it's kind of like your parents don't bring your problems home with them, but you can tell your dad's upset that something happened. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you don't put it on your kids. And that's how Hank was with us. But lo and behold, I had no idea that was going to help me in my life on how to deal with it. Because I got Chicago, I got the same mail, years later. And so the lessons that I learned with Hank on how to handle that, how to channel that energy to a positive direction. And as a matter of fact, I got 2 postcards right here from some hate mail that I got here in Texas because they didn't like what I had said about, different racial things here in this country. So it hasn't stopped. You know what I mean? It's just, it's probably not as much as it used to be, but it hasn't stopped. And I don't know if it ever stopped, but all I know is I learned a lot from Hank on how to deal with it and how to channel that energy to a positive direction.
Dusty, you mentioned the security guard, Calvin Wardlaw. He was an Atlanta policeman, decorated. He became a plainclothes security guard, accompanied Hank to the ballpark, would be in the stands during games. I assume he'd be in the clubhouse after the games.
Yep.
You get to know Wardlaw at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we saw him every night. Like I said, we were with Hank every night. And there was Hank, Ralph Garr, Paul Casanova, and myself. And we were in charge of kind of making Hank laugh and be loose with Hank. We were with Hank every night. I can't remember not being with Hank because, you know what, and then we sat next to Hank on the plane, and then he'd go to sleep, and then Ralph and I would try to sneak off and he'd grab us with those vice grip hands he had and sit back down, and then Ralph would make him laugh, and then you know, it was that was just part of our thing. And one of the saddest parts of my career and Ralph was when the Braves wouldn't sign Hank back in '75, and then Hank left to go to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And that kind of showed me, you know, how baseball will use somebody sometimes, because Hank, they offered him a $50,000 shake hands and meet and greet. And that's why when Hank went back to Milwaukee, he really liked Milwaukee. I mean, from a little young man from the South, he used to talk good about Milwaukee. I mean, he liked Atlanta too. But if there's any place he was going to go back to, you know, it would be Milwaukee.
Here at the Hall of Fame, we have a number of Aaron artifacts in his room, his exhibit called Chasing the Dream, including the uniform from April 8th, 1974. It's always an artifact that stirs emotions. We have the Topps baseball card, Hank Aaron, new all-time home run king, which was issued in 1974. Some great memories there. More recently, this is a wonderful photo. There was a few photos of you and Hank together. This one was my favorite. 2009, you're the manager of the Reds. There's your son, Darren, who's now a minor league ball player. And there you are. Hank's got his arm around your son. Talk about this photo. I love it.
Well, hey, you know, he loved my son, and he loved my mom, because he's asking about my mom all the time, and my daughter, Tosh. But, you know, Darren was a bat boy. And there's another photo just like that, but they're looking down. Hank's looking down at him, and Darren's rolling his eyes back up at Hank. And, you know, it's like, you know, proud papa and grandson almost, you know. And this was at the, what was the games that Jimmy Lee Solomon, who passed away, also started. Yeah, the civil rights games. And, you know, Hank was big on civil rights. And there were people that used to bother me that said that Hank was bitter. Hank was not bitter at all. You know, I mean, I don't know how he went through what he went through and not be bitter. But I mean, and then when I went to his funeral, I learned what a giving person Hank Aaron was. I mean, he gave away scholarships. He gave away a bunch of money to a bunch of different organizations and people through the Hank Aaron fund. I was like, foundation, I was like shocked and said, man, I got to get on the ball, because I'm not doing as much as I think I'm doing. I'm not even doing anything close to what Hank Aaron has done for society, you know, white and black kids. I mean, he treated people as fairly as anybody that I've ever met. You know, he and my father, especially when they could have been bitter, both from the South, and both went through a lot of changes.
Dusty, one final question. I know you have to go, but I'd be remiss if I did not ask you about winning a World Series. This is another great photograph of you. I have to ask you, is winning a World Series as a manager the same as winning it as a player? Maybe it's even better. How do you feel?
It's different. It's completely different. I mean, they're both great. I would, you know, as a player, you know, you can have a direct, you know, reflection and outcome in your performance in winning. But as a manager, you are completely at the mercy of the players coming through. But I mean, you can put them in a position, but like they say, players play and managers manage. And I'm so proud of these players here because, man, these guys have been through hell since I've been here about the scandal and stuff, and people still talking about it. But these guys have united, come together. The city has been the outstanding. I've never seen a city support its players, the way this city has. And so I'd have to say this is probably, one of the greatest feats of all time, especially in my life.
Dusty, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you over this past half hour. It's obvious that you paid attention to Hank Aaron. You learned a lot of good lessons from him. Thank you for being with us, and best of luck to you in the Astros this year.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
That's standout manager and former standout player Dusty Baker, joining us to talk about his longtime friend Hank Aaron, a guy that he learned a lot from during his major league career as a player, and certainly has carried some of that over as a longtime manager, 26 seasons at the helms of various teams, has won over 2,000 games, 3 pennants, and now the 1 World Series. Our thanks to Dusty Baker for joining us. We want to thank also all of you for listening. We also just want to preview an event coming up later this month. April 15th is going to be Jackie Robinson Day, as it always is. The day before April 14th, we'll have another virtual program. We're going to talk to 2 generations of Los Angeles Dodgers first basemen. One is Wes Parker, who played in the 60s and 70s. One is James Loney, who played in the 90s. Both have a connection to Jackie Robinson, and that program will be coming up 12:30 on Friday, April 14th. That's our next virtual Voices of the Game. So we look forward to that. Thanks again to Dusty and all of you for being with us. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.